Live from the district. 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 Live from the district.
So you know we're all about the important stories and the important people? Of course we are, because that's why we call it Live from the District. I am Easy Street, your host, live from 12 Stories Southwest D.C. And on the show today is a sister that I have the utmost respect for. When it comes to speaking truth to power, and when she does it, he does it. She blows up the spot. Don't laugh yet. I've been a fan of this sister for a very long time and her great work that she's doing over at the DC Justice Lab. Show your love right now for Patrice Sulton.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome to the show.
Being here. Thank you.
You know, I have a ton of respect for you and the work that you're doing in the DC area. First of all, tell everybody exactly what the DC Justice Lab is.
Well, it's a mutual respect. Our work together at DC Justice Lab was really foundational to who we are as an organization. It was our first proof of concept that people who are directly affected by our laws can and should and must write our laws if we want them to be effective. And so, you know, through that first engagement with you and the Music Academy, working on an expungement bill, we really were able to demonstrate for everybody that that's how lawmaking should look. And it was a long process from then until making that law, but it was a worthwhile one, and I think sets us on a path to more of that kind of change.
Right. So DC Justice Lab is an organization that does what? Fill in the blank.
Yeah, so we are law and policy experts who are trying to make the district safer, and that includes safety from community violence, and it includes safety from state violence as well. And we are setting out to transform the district's approach to public safety and really make it a leader in justice reform for the rest of the country to follow. We have one of the biggest, blackest, most expensive criminal legal systems anywhere, and we think we can do a lot better to keep people safe.
So what do you think about the current criminal justice system? There is a reform that everyone's talking about, but what do you think about the system? And are we there yet as far as reform? Of course we're not, but go ahead.
We have a lot of work to do. I mean, there are a lot of policies that need to be changed. There are things about policy making that need to be changed, but there are also things about public attitudes that really have to shift for us to move closer to the vision that I think we all have for people to be able to live well and thrive and not just get by. And so I think it's a worthwhile effort, and sometimes it feels like a big lift, but we have moments in history within my lifetime and your lifetime that show us that an awful lot is possible in a short period of time.
We had a black president. We have a same-sex marriage. We have decriminalization of marijuana, recreational marijuana in some cities and states as well. So those are the kind of changes that you're talking about.
Those are great examples. I mean, I graduated from law school 15 years ago and wouldn't have believed at that time that we would have had a black president or a black woman on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And marijuana decriminalization happened since then. There are other huge changes in the wrong direction that have happened in the same span of time that show us that radical efforts really can take root very quickly, and that we have to stay vigilant in our pursuit of a world that we know can be a lot better.
Now, you said community attitudes. Like, what are we talking about here? Because the community has to buy in and understand it. Hey, man, it shouldn't be like this.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
In some ways, it feels very common sense to me. I think most people have been a parent or had a parent, and most people have been a teacher or had a teacher. And this idea that you can over-punish someone should feel familiar in that sense, right? We know that there's such a thing as over-punishing and actually making someone's behavior worse. But when we talk about community violence and how to solve it, oftentimes that's where we default. We think about punishment. And we don't recognize that there is such a thing as over-punishing a person. There's such a thing as over-punishing a city. There's such a thing as over-punishing a neighborhood. And that's what we've been doing for the last 2 generations now. We've been punishing so much that we are making people's behavior worse, and we are all worse off for it. And so what I'd like to see is a city in which we're not just defaulting to subjugating a class of people, identifying one set of harms that we are going to overpunish in the name of safety and justice, and that we actually look for prevention, we actually look for solutions that are going to keep people from inflicting harm in the first place to the extent that we can do that through policy.
Now, is that possible? I mean, realistically, I have to ask this question. Is that really possible? I mean, in this country, for us to be able to turn back the hands of time on the overpunishment thing? Because you're absolutely right. I hate to, bring up, but a guy that's been on this show, Tony Lewis, sat in this chair right here, and his father was overpunished. Is that a good example of that, or am I wrong?
I think that's an excellent example of someone who was overpunished and a community suffering as a result of not having someone physically with us to contribute so much. And he contributed a lot even while he was being punished. But I think some would say that he, with freedom, would have been able to contribute even more over those decades away.
And that's just one story, because there are millions and thousands of individuals who are locked up right now that don't belong behind bars. And I have so many stories of individuals that I've worked with in the past that just got locked up for a little bit of weed and ended up being incarcerated in Texas, separated from their families over a little bit of weed, all the way in multiple states, and went back to D.C. and the judge was like, "What happened to you?" They were like, "You need to go home." So I'm like, what's going on here? Is that what you're talking about?
I think you had it right when you said millions. I mean, we have millions of people incarcerated in the United States. And when we think about freedom being a path to safety, we know that we have way too many people behind bars. We're not just looking at what is the worst thing that someone's done. We're looking at what is the right solution to that. And so little consideration is given to what do victims need? What does the community need? What does that person need in order for us to all heal and move forward and do better and stay safe? And so much more consideration is given to what message do we want to send to the public about how tough we are? And we've become very tough on people and very soft on crime. We've become very soft on violence. We've become very soft on guns. And we've just become really, really hard on communities that have less. And when you ask whether I think it's possible, I do think it's possible, because we are in a city where we have virtually abolished police, prosecutors, and prisons for white people. There are no white people in jail in Washington, D.C. And so when people ask about, what would abolition look like? Isn't this...
Except the individuals from January 6th.
There are, yes, we've got 3 dozen people in the jail over the last 2 years.
But the other 99% is black.
Right. And those are federal charges. We work on a lot of local policy. But yeah, I mean, aside from that wing of CTF, there are very few white people who are policed. And that's a great example, because when we look at what happened on January 6th, those people were allowed to go back to Utah, to California, elsewhere, and they were not deemed such a risk of flight that people had to go to their hotels, they knew where they were staying, had to go to their cars, they knew where their cars were, and search them. They didn't see them as dangerous in that way. They didn't see them as a risk of flight in that way. They said, we'll apprehend them when we want to. But if you have a 19 or 20-year-old black kid from D.C. who missed one status hearing once upon a time, they're deemed such a danger, such a risk of flight, that they have to be held in the jail pre-trial. And so we just have a really stark contrast between how we think of those subjective measures of dangerousness and risk. And we have to rethink the emphasis that we're putting on race versus risk, and really pay attention to what are the harms that we can expect will happen as a result of different conduct. And we're just not paying attention to that at all. We're paying attention to rhetoric, we're paying attention to headlines, and the underlying policy and the attitudes behind that are really getting lost in the fray.
I have a 2-part question. So right now here in the District of Columbia and also surrounding areas, Prince George's County, DMV, and probably nationwide, I'm not sure about a lot of other places, but I do know that young people are committing a lot of crimes. And now we're going to see people that are going to make decisions, whether it be the mayor, city council, or the state's attorney, in Virginia or in Maryland, where they're going to be harsher in their punishment of these young people. We already know that that's going to happen. The hammer is about to come down on these young people, period. We already see it coming. My question to you is this. Do you have a problem with that, number one? And number two, what would you do if you had to make those decisions?
I have a huge problem with that. And not just because I think it's unfair to those young people to not be given a first chance, but because I know that those harsher punishments are going to make it more likely that violence will get worse. So just from a selfish standpoint, I want more and more people to appreciate that we're going to see a lot more crime if we keep using the same approaches to crime that we've been using since the 1980s in this city. It is very dangerous to keep meeting violence with violence and hoping that it'll go away. And as much as people in this city like to quote luminaries like Martin Luther King Jr., our policies don't reflect those philosophies at all. We continue to suggest that by punishing, that by hurting, we're going to be able to make things better. And it's just not going to work. We're in a difficult position. This is an intolerable amount of crime. We should never be comfortable with this many people dying from gun violence in our city. But to keep pretending that maximizing a penalty beyond a person's lifespan is going to deter it effectively is just fiction. We are peddling this false sense of progress and not doing anything about the root cause of these problems.
So and you're right about not doing something with the root cause. Absolutely. But what do we do? What do we tell that mother that just saw her son get killed, in any part of this city? And they want justice because it goes back to the community attitudes that you mentioned as well. What do we say to those families when they have to experience that?
I appreciate you mentioning those families because I think they are missing from the conversation. I don't see a lot of victims at the press conferences like the ones that we've seen over the last few weeks talking about what justice means to them or what they want to see in the process. And our criminal legal system isn't really designed for their voices to lead the way, and it should be in some sense. And when we talk about the most horrific kinds of crime, I think victims' voices are most important in those cases. And so to some degree, my answer is it depends on what that person wants, and it depends on what that person is able to be counseled and informed about before making a decision about what to recommend. But it certainly shouldn't be the case that we set a floor and we say the minimum that anybody can get for conducting themselves in a particular way is X. And we don't care what the victim needs. We don't care what the relevant circumstances were. We're just going to tie the hands of our courts and of victims and of prosecutors and say this is the minimum penalty. And so that's, I think, one of the policies that comes to mind most quickly when you talk about a really horrific example like someone losing their life. I just think victims' voices are so important in shaping the policy for all of us and in those individual cases that affected them directly.
So, Patrice, before we start talking about solitary confinement, because that's something that I know that you're passionate about, you've been doing work in that arena, and I follow you on Instagram at DC Justice Lab.
Thank you.
That's a plug right there. I want to ask you about this, because we know that environments matter. And through the work that I do, sitting down and working with some of these young people and hearing their stories and hearing the environments that they've come up in, the childhood trauma that they've experienced, the things that they've seen in their houses are horrific. It sounds like a freaking movie. I mean, I had grown men that I've worked with their mothers, left them on doorsteps and walked away, only to find out that lady that's been walking past his house for the last 15, 20 years was really his mother. And he didn't find that out until she passed away. These kinds of pains and wounds and trauma that these individuals have experienced, and a lot of it is environmental too, because of where they live. And I don't mean just their community, but the environments that they are living in because of poverty or whatever their family condition inside their home. Like, what is your position on that? Like from a community standpoint, like what should a municipality or a city be doing to remedy, knowing that there's kids in Southeast, Northeast, and other parts of our city and the DMV that are suffering and living in these impoverished situations?
Yeah, I'm anti-pain. I'm anti-heartbreak. I'm anti-violence is the first thing I think of when I hear a story like that. That's heartbreaking for that child. I'm sure it's heartbreaking for that mother. It's just a real loss. And we have to figure out how are we going to prevent loss and how are we going to heal people after loss. I haven't heard enough in the policy sphere in DC about preventing that kind of loss in the first place. You've given 3 examples now since we've been talking about people losing family, about people being separated either in a permanent sense or in a physical sense from their family, from the person incarcerated in Texas to the person who lost their loved one to violence to the person who wasn't able to know and spend time with their mother. And we should be setting out with the same sense of urgency and same vigor to make sure that families have one another to hold close, to hold up, to keep safe and to protect. And we just are not doing that in the same way that we're thinking about, okay, once a harm happens, how do we make sure we harm that person back? And I feel so much for the person in that example that we owed them more at the outset. When we held our community safety fair this summer, I learned a lot of new things. And one person's proposal that stuck out to me so much was about foster care in the city. And I didn't realize that people whose children are separated from them, who have the opportunity to visit with their kids, only visit with them about 3 days a year. We add up all the hours. It's very little contact between the parent and the child. And they were setting out to change that so parents could have more contact with their kids. And I think about that as really horrific violence when you think about the needs of the people in the example that you just gave.
Mm-hmm. The reason why I bring it up is because a lot of times, Patrice, that kind of experience creates a beeline into a system, into a criminal justice system. This happened to me a long time ago. I was hurt by it, so now I'm going to hurt other people. Yeah. And I think that from a government standpoint, we need to really zoom in and find out what's going on in the lives of these young people, and then try to find some type of data that we need to look at to see where these data points are lining up. And then, hey, listen, we need to speak to that right there. Yes. We need more programming right there. We need to sink more dollars into a program that's going to deal with those areas right there so we can prevent that in the future. That's where I am with it. I'm going to jump off my soapbox and let you get on yours in regards to solitary confinement, because I know that's something that you're very passionate about.
Thank you. Yes, I think we need to be looking at what's happening, and we need to be looking at what's not happening in all of their lives. And solitary is a good example of what we were talking about before with respect to overpunishment. We have a little bit of data to go on in some of the jurisdictions, they're mostly white jurisdictions, that have tried to reduce their reliance on solitary confinement. And that data demonstrates that violence in those institutions actually goes down when you take a new approach to how you're going to treat people who are living there, when you take a new approach to how you're going to deal with harm once it's occurred. And in some sense, that is a microcosm for all of the public safety policy that we're talking about. There is such a thing as being so punitive that you end up with more incidents of violence. We can't be serious about reforming our criminal justice system without talking about the most horrific examples of punishment. And that includes solitary confinement in D.C., and it includes the death penalty in a lot of other parts of our country. And D.C., before we even had a pandemic, was using solitary confinement 3 times more than most jurisdictions were using it. And we were the only place that when COVID happened, locked down the entire jail for more than 500 days. We had 1,500 people confined to their cells 23 hours a day for well over a year. And no one held a hearing on it until those white guys from January 6th made their way into the jail. And that's just unacceptable.
Is that when the lady, what's that, the lady from Congress?
Marjorie Taylor Greene made her way over to
I'm so upset. This is a horrific condition. Man, black people been in that jail, same spot. You ain't said nothing about them. But when the white people got caught up in it, this is what's going on? This is a travesty.
Imagine my surprise to be quoted in an article alongside her. She's not wrong about the jail conditions, but she is wrong about them being treated worse than other people there. Everyone there is being treated poorly. And another thing that we've been working on that she mentioned that I think is worth mentioning is the food and nutrition standards and the health standards at the jail. That's something we hope to see change. That's something that's legislation is pending on right now as well. So excited about both of those developments, and we hope that they become law very soon.
So it's been well documented that solitary confinement also is not good for the individual mentally and emotionally and spiritually as well. I think that Jay-Z did the documentary on, was it Khalif Browder? Was Khalif Browder in the documentary on Netflix, was he in solitary?
Yes.
He committed suicide, right?
Yes. People are much more likely to take their own life if they've been in solitary confinement. And there are other things that I'm learning about the experience when I talk to survivors of solitary that I never would have thought of, but really make a lot of sense. For example, we've had People talk about how your vision atrophies because you're not looking beyond a few feet in front of you for such a long period of time that you come out and you can't see that much farther in front of you. There are people who have been held for years in those conditions. And one thing that we've found especially powerful to share that I'll share with you is an audio recording of what it sounds like to be inside a cell like that. And it just is, it is beyond cruel. And it's something that does not, that no one could consistently believe is okay, while also believing that whatever happened on the outside was not okay. You can't reconcile those two beliefs. Either cruelty is wrong or cruelty is not wrong. And to not see that as victimization, to not see that as violence, means that we are not paying attention to what's happening there. Spending an hour or two in solitary confinement as an exercise has led to lawmakers in other cities really starting to take it seriously. And as long as we keep the narratives hidden away, it's harder to move the change we want to see. So we've got to really share those stories with people. We've got to encourage them to sit in a cell for an hour and see how it feels. It just is, it's inhumane. There's just no other way to say it.
Are there studies or data that proves that it's a problem for someone to be in a institution in solitary confinement and how it affects them emotionally and their mind state? Is there data out there or studies?
Absolutely. And I think the best example that you've given is really about self-harm and suicide. But what you should also understand is that people who are already experiencing mental health issues, either because they have a chronic illness or because confinement in a jail itself has caused
Makes it worse.
Right? That they are also more likely to be put in solitary confinement.
Wow.
And so when you look at the safe cells in D.C. jail that some journalists have covered from the Washington City paper over the last couple of years, so many people would be surprised to learn that if somebody is thought to be suicidal, the response to that is, let's put them in a small closet without any clothes, without any mattress, by themselves, pushing food through a slot, and see how that makes them feel. See if that makes them not suicidal anymore.
That doesn't sound like rehabilitation to me at all. That sounds like cruelty and torture, and that sounds very harmful.
It's much more graphic than I think is even appropriate for your program, but I would encourage people to really read that article and think and see what the conditions in these safe cells are like. It is absolutely
It's not safe at all.
horrifying.
Why would they call it that? It's not a safe cell.
It's not a safe cell.
At all. Okay, before we close out, I want to ask you this. So pushback, I'm sure that you received some pushback about this idea about solitary confinement. How has it been so far? And I know you have some allies too.
It's interesting because there really is no pro-solitary movement the way we have other kinds of opposition in other spaces. I think everyone recognizes that if something is cruel and inhumane, we shouldn't do it. But people are at a loss for imaginative solutions. And people say, well, what else are we supposed to do? And I think that that really is the response that's needed, is educating people on how institutions outside of the United States and now a few institutions inside the United States have been able to demonstrate what it would look like to run a closed cage, for lack of a better word, that isn't as violent as the institutions that we have here. And so it's hard for me to be excited about the idea of designing a better cage, but there certainly are ways to do it. And the people with the best ideas about how to do it, unsurprisingly, are the people who have been there themselves.
All right, Patrice, before we wrap up, a couple things that you got coming up that we all need to be on the horizon about as far as the work that you're doing at the DC Justice Lab.
Thank you. I'm hoping that everybody who watches this will go visit safeandfreedc.com, where you can learn a lot more about the specific policy proposals that not just DC Justice Lab is working on, but that a lot of other pro-Black organizations and graduates of our Policy Training Academy have put forward. And so there you'll see all of the proposals, and you have an opportunity to sign on for our vision of public safety that's broader than punishment. And we really hope that that message spreads. So sign on, tell a friend, tell an organization to join us in that work.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
All right, that is our show for today. I'm going to put my fist up like this. Patrice Sulton, DC Justice Lab. Thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of Live from the District. I'm Easy Street. We will see you next time. Peace.
Live from the district. Live from the district. Live from the district.